Okay, I'm going to move into the rest of the update. We like to start off with recognizing some of the work going on within the organization, and starting off with, appropriately so, our team at the Happy Hollow Zoo. Um, Happy Hollow Zoo is one of our many facilities that's closed its doors to the public as we comply with the health orders to stay at home and not have places open for gathering. Well, there's 150 animals that comprise this zoo that still need care and enrichment time, and it takes a team effort. So our Happy Hollow team is out there, the zoo manager, zoo curator, the veterinarian teams, the senior zookeepers and other zookeepers. All of the staff are out there caring for the animals, making sure that they're fed and cared for and they have enrichment time. And certainly an important function that we be able to make sure that they are all safe during this time and are ready for reopening someday. As with all our facilities, the Happy Hollow team has adopted new safety measures for how the team works, including physical distancing during the time that they're doing work. So just want to thank the entire Happy Hollow Zoo team for caring for the animals and keeping up the good work. The next team I want to thank is really all the citywide timekeepers. And I had mentioned something earlier in one of my reports. Timekeepers always do important work to make sure that our time is accounted for accurately. We have so many funding sources within the city, hundreds and hundreds, and we need to make sure that time is traced to the appropriate funding source. Well, in this COVID environment, that gets about 1 million times more complicated as we need to track our time for potential reimbursement with FEMA and other sources. And so it's really the job of the timekeeping team, both in finance and all the timekeepers in each of the departments, making sure that we're doing that work accurately. A lot of it has to be manual now because of the kind of the special requirements. And certainly doing this work as the timekeepers are working remotely, not having access to all the monitors they normally do, and even printers makes the process more complicated. And certainly even trying to resolve issues with staff that are off doing work in various places can even complicate that. But each time period, the team's gotten better at it, and I think we're in good shape for any reimbursement that we get. And just want to show a lot of appreciation for the staff behind the scenes getting the work done. Wanted to provide a little bit of an update on Verily. The city team is working with Verily, which is a Google company, and the county of Santa Clara to stand up a fast deployment COVID testing site. The site will be located in the east side at the Police Athletic Field Stadium. Up to 250 tests will be available per day, 2 to 3 days per week. The targeted opening for testing for the public will be sometime next week, and more messaging will be coming out from us and Verily in the county once we've got things set up. There will be a website for folks to self-screen and to register for either vehicle or pedestrian visits. And this is a free service to the community, and we want to thank Verily for their interest in setting this up in San Jose, and we greatly appreciate that. Wanted to note that yesterday it was announced that later in the week, the public health officers will be issuing a revised shelter-in-place orders. The orders will be extended beyond May 3rd, which is when the current orders expire. But we are expecting to hear about some easing of specific restrictions for lower risk activities. So that information, as they revise those orders, is expected to come out later on in the week. I also wanted to acknowledge at Rules last week, the Rules Committee approved a memo from the mayor called Back to Work Safely, Preparing a Protected, Prudent Path. And so that memo was approved by the Rules Committee, and it lays out various recommendations that, that we intend to integrate into either future 3.1 updates or individually agendized council items. I think the items that are in the memo align well with much of the work that we're already doing, and also provide some input to work that we can be doing to get ready for future revised orders where more work can occur in a safe manner. So I wanted to acknowledge that, and you'll be seeing in reports how we are able to report out on our various efforts with regard to those recommendations. So next we're going to get into the updates from the team. So we'll have an update from the EOC from Lee Wilcox. We'll also have Rosario provide an update from the EPIO functions and work that we've been doing on public information. Kip will also provide an update as we're looking forward on recovery to resilience. We also will have an update from Rosalind and Chris Burton on development services and what we're doing there, both currently and looking forward. And then Hector Estrada and Chu Chang will be available for questions for that part. And then we will also provide an update on federal spending guidance and advocacy that we're doing. And so that'll be done by Lee and Luce Crofesi Howe and Benna Chang. So that's what's going to be coming up. And I'm going to hand it over to Lee to start off the EOC update.
Thanks, Dave. Maybe just start the presentation. Thanks, Dave. On behalf of Kip Harkness and I'll be starting the presentation as the EOC director for the past week. On behalf of both Kip and I, we do want to thank everyone in the Emergency Operations Center, the field, and in the organization overall. Without this team in place, we wouldn't be able to do some of the things that we are doing and achieving the goals we are achieving. And most importantly, we wouldn't be able to ensure that our residents can comply with the public health order and stay at home without this team. So on behalf of Kip and I, thank you to everyone. Today, we're going to kind of lightly cover, as Dave mentioned, within the EOC update, our compliance, as well as some updates on food distribution, our homelessness assistance. But a bulk of the presentation today is really going to be the conversation will really focus on kind of looking forward in the recovery process around our economy, as well as our kind of our own fiscal health as an organization. So on the compliance side, kind of our peak compliance, as we noted last week, was really on Sunday, April 5th at 61% of the public complying with the public health order. And this data, again, is in partnership with Stanford University. Although there's not been a significant shift in the at-home behavior over the last 2 Sundays, compliance has dropped somewhat over the last 2 Saturdays as the weather's gotten better. And again, as this data is shared, we don't know with this data if this is simply someone taking their dog for a walk around the block or trying to head down to Southern California to see some of the people at the beach. So we are continuing to refine that data with Stanford University, and we are continuing to monitor this closely to ensure that our own residents are complying with the public health order. And a lot of this will manifest itself in kind of how we enhance our communications and some of the work that Rosario, her team, and the behavioral insights groups have been working on as we look at this data. Moving on to our food program. Program continues to scale and become even more efficient. And this isn't just on the city side, but with all of our partners and our CBOs, school districts, and the work with the county. In addition to just meeting the need of now, Our planning and forecasting models for this crisis continue to evolve. And as you can see, the most recent kind of our total current plus our pipeline, we've got capacity for 3.3 million meals on a weekly basis. So this number will continue to evolve, but as we continue to partner with the county and better understand the public health order and kind of the timing of that and possible surge demands, we're able to scale this program accordingly to meet the needs of our public. Importantly too, what you guys don't see on the slide and what we haven't been able to report out that you'll hear a little bit later is at the same time, the food distribution team in partnerships with the emergency operations centers recovery section have implemented a very robust tracking and documentation system throughout the entire county so that we can drill down to specific sites and understand what money we're spending at what sites and what populations within our community that we're tracking. This has been in partnership with our FEMA reimbursement consultants to ensure that we maximize reimbursement throughout the city. For our homelessness assistance program, over the last week, the city opened up the temporary shelter at the Camden Community Center. So there's currently 4 families there and 32 individuals. We continue to scale the beds reserved for COVID-19 positive, but as you can see, the very little of those have filled. So the sheltering of our shelter system has really helped mitigate some of the concerns around the spread of COVID in our unsheltered community. And I just wanted to highlight, even amidst of this emergency response, just the great work of our housing department and their continued focus on their overall mission for the city of permanently housing our unsheltered residents. And just a really great fact, since the COVID response started in March, our housing department has still housed 306 of our unsheltered residents in permanent supportive housing. So to Jackie and her department, thank you and very well done. And with that, I am going to hand it off to Rosario to go over our emergency public information officer report.
Thank you, Lee. Good morning, council members. Rosario Nieves, Director of Communications, and in this activation, I am the Emergency Public Information Officer, and I'm happy to share with you this morning an update from the Emergency Public Information Branch, mainly focusing on how we're engaging our workforce and keeping our employees informed during the pandemic. Next slide, Lee. Thank you. So as I updated you all a couple of weeks ago on our overall communication objectives, we are focused on not just public health messaging for the broader San Jose community and educating our community on how we're continuing to operate during the pandemic, but a key part of our communication strategy is making sure that the workforce is engaged and informed. We are continuing to provide them with regular, reliable, and timely information and are very much committed to ensuring that they are in the loop about how the city is responding to COVID and are also feeling recognized and motivated during this pandemic. Next slide. Thanks. So in looking at internal communications, there are some key guiding principles that I use in ensuring that workforces are engaged. And one of the key factors that we need to keep in mind here in San Jose is that our workforce is very dispersed. Not all of our employees are office workers and in front of computers or email. And so that's something that is definitely a challenge for our organization as it is many other cities. And it's also important that we, in communicating with our workforce, that we adhere to some guiding principles that help guide all of our communications when we're interacting with employees. And so here are the ones that I am most focused on, and so I'll just detail them for you really quickly. Honesty and transparency. We don't spin in our communications, and it's important that we are authentic and we stay true to the unique voice of the City of San Jose culture and our employees. We like to capture meaningful moments that matter most to the organization and our culture, and tap into our employees' passions, and also take a multi-channeled approach to the way that we communicate with employees. And so I'll walk you through some of those methods that we've used during this pandemic. And we want our communications to be compelling. We want to tell stories and highlight examples and use different channels to do that. Next slide. So this is the internal communications unit that is behind most of the communications that you're going to see today. And I will say that this does not capture everybody that's been involved in putting our communications together. The internal communications unit is being led by Cheryl Parkman and Bill Gold in our employee relations team. And then there are many other individuals that are contributing, and this team is working in collaboration with our content development unit and especially our language access team in disseminating the communications that you're going to see. And so thank you to everybody who's been involved in putting these communications together. Next slide. So the team had a really cool brainstorm on March 25th, back in March, to generate some new ideas in not only how we're reaching our internal employees and our workforce, but we actually took some time to brainstorm ideas and messaging for each one of the target audiences that we're reaching during the pandemic. And so a couple of weeks ago, I walked you all through the wheel of our internal and external audiences. We actually used a great virtual tool called Mural to brainstorm some ideas and bring a very diverse team together and thinking through the messages that were important to convey to each one of these groups. And through the brainstorm, we actually came up with some new ideas for how we can engage our workforce outside of our traditional methods. And so you're going to see some of those today. Next slide. So one of those is creating an employee flash report. So as most of you all know, and those members of the community who have subscribed to our external flash reports, we created an internal one for employees a while back. And so we're now at flash report number 11. Those flash reports are disseminated twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. And they include resources for employees as well as reminders about important information or policy changes. We also have recapped for them the city manager's reports to you all in his item 3.1 to the city council meetings. We've also included resources such as the employee assistance program, as we know that many of us are just trying to cope with the impacts of coronavirus to our daily lives. We want to ensure that employees know that there's resources and assistance that exist for them and that they can certainly reach out to those resources. And we've been very successful in getting these updates out to employees. And for those employees who may not be in front of computers, we're actually encouraging their supervisors or division managers to share them in in-person meetings with employees. And so that's been an approach that's worked very well. Next slide. We also are recognizing our employees as unsung heroes. And so in our flash report, we recently, you can see this example here, we recently highlighted the Department of Transportation sewer team. The sewer team there in DOT is continuing to work in the field and perform their regular duties that many of us may not know are continuing during the pandemic. And so we want to ensure that those employees are feeling motivated and recognized and appreciated because they're the ones who are keeping our city running. As Dave says in his enterprise priorities, we are an organization that is powered by people, and we could not continue to do and manage our city services and operations without those frontline workers who are continuing to maintain our city facilities. And so we're doing everything we can to recognize them. Our employees are also helping us and disseminate these messages to the community. And so this highlight here that you can see is from the San Jose Fire Department, where several fire personnel, a whole team in fact, has participated in disseminating public education messages, such as the physical distancing procedures that we want the community to follow. And so they're actually stepping in and serving as spokespeople. There's been an entire fire department team that has been behind putting these videos together. And so especially want to recognize Erica Ray, the public information officer in the fire department, and Vitaly Litvinenko, who was our videographer, who has been behind much of our video work that not only that you see here in this fire department YouTube channel, but many of our videos. Next slide. We are also using our social media channels to recognize our essential workers and thank them. And so the post that you see here is an Instagram post, and you can see that it was posted in 3 different languages, in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese, and it features an actual San Jose Police Department employee, and you can see that she's out there on the front lines protecting our residents. And so this is another opportunity for us to not only say thank you to all of our first responders, but also to highlight for the community the work that our city employees are doing to protect them and make sure that they are staying safe. And that also underscores why it's important for our residents to mind the shelter-in-place order, because we don't want to put our first responders at risk. Next slide. And so this example here is, you're not going to see the full clip, it's just a screen grab of the YouTube channel, but you can go to the fire department's YouTube channel and you can see a host of videos. This one features firefighter Michael Briggs, and he's educating the community about how they are practicing physical distancing at station number 2 and encouraging the community to also practice physical distancing when they're out and about in the community. Next slide. And this is really cool. We actually got some of our employees to have their own family members star as models in our ads. And so just really great job to the emergency public information team for their creativity in putting this public health messaging together with behavioral insights, but also getting their families to star in that. One of the challenges that we face in putting these ads together is that we can't go out and conduct our regular type of photo shoots. And so we actually had employees volunteer and have their family members star in it. So you actually see in these ads, Raul Hernandez's mother, his wife, and his son, Vitaly's father-in-law and wife, Christine Ribeiro's husband, Julie Kim's daughter, and Chelsea Palacios' mother and sister. So thank you to all the employees and their families and loved ones for putting themselves out there and serving as messages in our community. It was another fun way to engage our workforce. Next slide. And so this has been a really great effort on the part of City Manager Dave Sykes. And so City Manager Dave Sykes recently hosted a series of virtual employee town halls using Zoom. We had a great turnout from our workforce, and we received many comments from employees that just said, thank you very much for everything that you're doing in the Emergency Operations Center, but also for just being available to answer questions. And so the video that you're actually watching now is just an example of one of the evening sessions, or an evening session that Dave conducted last night with employees. And you can see that employees had an opportunity to actually chat live and call in and have their question answered. They also were able to type their questions in and have either Dave or a leadership team member answer their question live. And so employees really loved this opportunity to chat directly with the city manager and the leadership team, and appreciated the effort and the entire series. And so in the next slide, you'll actually see some of the results. We were able to reach nearly 1 in 5 employees through this effort. We conducted 4 virtual town halls. There were 3 daytime sessions and 1 evening session. And we did have over 1,200 unique employees came in. And so what that means is that the employees had an opportunity to attend any of the sessions, and we were able to count that there were 1,285 unique participants, but employees may have attended more than 1 session. And we answered over 180 questions. What was very important to the city manager in conducting these town halls was providing the employees an opportunity to ask questions, but also providing the employees an opportunity to give input. And so we actually heard lots of great ideas from employees, and you can see a snapshot here of the types of topics that we heard from employees. They asked questions about the budget and the city's shortfalls. They asked about what we were doing in terms of how we were going to secure federal and state funding. They asked about returning to work and what does it look like once we recover from coronavirus, and what will their daily jobs look like. And they also asked questions about whether we will have layoffs and furloughs. So Dave was very committed to answering each of those employees' questions, and it was a very fun type of way to interact with our employee workforce. And most of these ideas came out of that workshop. So just want to recognize my entire emergency public information team and everybody who came up with these creative ideas and these new ways to engage our workforce. Thank you very much. Over to Kip.
Thank you, Rosario and Lee. I just want to talk a little bit about our path forward through recovery to resilience. And on the next slide, you'll see what is probably becoming familiar to you as we rapidly went up through stages 1 through 5 and are currently in stage 5. How do we come out of the current stage 5 and make our way over time back to our new normal of stage 10? The answer will be slowly, complicated, and unfortunately not always a linear path. It very well may see as we move from stage 6 to stage 7 that if the virus ticks up based on testing in the area, we may have to go back to stage 6 or even potentially back to stage 5. So I wanted to share just a little bit more about kind of what we're planning that we're beginning to do around stage 6 and what that will look like. We are beginning to engage the department heads and department directors around this, just starting this work in depth, and really have to await both the county orders and revisions as we go, and then an assessment of our own capabilities. We'll be asking key questions such as what can be done safely, what addresses the public health crisis, what is useful to jumpstart the economy, what can be done with services that respects our fiscal challenges, and how do we make sure that we're doing this in a way that has an equity lens and is focused on supporting our most vulnerable, as well as understanding who we really have available to reassign, given so many people are in the emergency operations and many of our employees continue to be at higher risk, and we want to make sure that we respect very much their safety as a bottom line as we reopen services gradually. So over the next week or so, we'll be working with department heads to develop out more complex plans for resumption of service, which will be a graduated turning on of the tap as we go. And we'll have to look at a number of different tools and interventions, such as social distancing and workplace modification. Telecommuting will continue as a big tool, staggered shifts, extensive use or more extensive use of PPE, personal protective equipment, enhanced cleaning, and of course the testing as well to ensure continued safety for all of our workers. So we're putting those plans together. It will take some time. We anticipate that the next county health order will largely extend the existing orders, loosening, but we will be using this time to do the planning so that as soon as we can, we will begin to turn back on additional services, provided we can do them safely and in a way that has the best impact on our community, answering the questions that I outlined above. So we'll keep you informed as we go. I just wanted you to know that this is a continual work in progress. We also are really thinking about how we walk back on this in case we have to go in the opposite direction in order to protect the safety of our employees and our community. So with that, one of the things that we've been talking about is development services. We're hopeful that at some point the construction ability will be broadened by the public health order. We want to be ready for that when it comes. In the meantime, we have been doing a number of very innovative approaches to how we provide development services. And since that work has been done by our development services team, I'm going to let them get the credit they deserve and speak directly to that. So for this next section, we have Rosalind Huey, Chris Burton, Hector Estrada, and Chu Chang, who will work us through some of the not only response to the COVID-19 crisis that has taken place in development services, but actually the acceleration of the already underway development services transformation into the digital realm to provide our customers with the services that they need and deserve. With that, I'll turn it over to Rosalind.
Thank you, Kip. Good morning, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the public. Rosalind Huey, Director of the Department of Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement. So I'm really glad to be with you this morning to share with you about the development services work that we have been able to continue under the county order. So within a 3-week span, the development services partners like many other departments across the city, faced an extreme transition of our operations marked by 3 major milestones. This timeline maps new procedures that staff needed to create during this highly fluid crisis. First, I want to acknowledge that while we have adapted to our new way of working, this was certainly a very challenging situation. And we know that many of our customers, quite frankly, continue to still be very frustrated as the rules have changed, and our staff has had to find themselves becoming very familiar with the new county orders, the rules that we have to abide by, and actually working to consult with other individuals to interpret those orders. And then on top of that, our staff have been adjusting to providing our services differently, as now most of our staff are working remotely. So with the shelter-in-place order effective March 17 and the closing of City Hall to the public, we began to implement our continuity of operations plans. So at this time, our on-site inspections were continuing for both commercial and residential projects. We put in place procedures for remote application intake and for remote plan review. And with that, we had to communicate with our customers. So we launched a remote development services procedures webpage and communicated with members of our development and construction roundtable, as well as did various types of outreach to our customers, including using social media. To further ensure the safety of all of our staff, on March 23rd, we transitioned to most of our services being provided remotely. Staff were trained on new intake procedures. Supervisors delivered backlog of paper plans to plan review staff offsite. Inspection assignments were beginning to be distributed offsite, and we quickly trained and worked with our commissioners so that the March 25th Planning Commission meeting could be held virtually. And we think that we were probably actually the first in the city in the region actually to conduct a Planning Commission virtually. And that took a lot of training of staff and assisting our commissioners to conduct that meeting virtually. And then on March 31st, the new county order became effective that further restricted construction activity. So we ramped up testing and training for remote inspections for our smaller projects, and we started virtual appointments with our customers. So the next slide will show the development services that we have been able to continue under the county order. So you can see on the building side, we have been able to continue with building plan review, building permit issuance. We are able to intake new building permits remotely, and we have been able to conduct on-site inspections as allowed under the county order. And in addition, we've been able to do remote inspections using video conferencing. Then on the planning side, we have continued our work under planning development review as well as environmental review. We are continuing to be able to take new planning applications. And as I mentioned, we are conducting our Planning Commission, Historic Landmarks Commission meetings, as well as our director hearings, all via Zoom. So the next slide will provide some data in terms of the amount of work that we've been able to conduct. So you can see that on building plan reviews, we've actually been able to complete 646 plan reviews. We've actually conducted over 2,000 on-site building inspections. Now this number does include, for the first week of the order, we were still able to conduct commercial inspections. So that number is about 1,000 of that 2,000 number. We've been actually able to conduct 160 remote building inspections and take in new building permits of 176. We've been able to continue to issue building permits. Now, we know that many of our customers aren't able to actually start construction under the county order, but we have been able to issue almost 600 new building permits. 22 applications have been heard at planning hearings. And then we've received over almost 300 new planning applications. And then for the Public Works Department, they have also been able to continue to deliver their services in issuing 424 permits. So the next slide. Thank you. Provides information on the fire prevention activity that has been able to continue. And we know how important this work is. So the fire prevention services were also able to adapt to working remotely. The fire department has focused on making progress on the backlog of projects awaiting to be assigned during the county order. They have been working with development services partners, supporting approved projects and those related to COVID-19 response. Efforts have been made to ensure that the flow of inbound projects and key functions such as authorized inspections, fee payment, and communication channels were in place. In addition, just wanted to add that fire has been able to conduct numerous inspections for surge capacity at our local hospitals and shelters. The next slide talks about all that we want to consider as we talk about reopening of the economy. What does that mean? And we think that there are some lessons that the development services partners can take from our current experience that we believe can support improved operations while still being safe in a COVID-19 world. So first, we will see more efficiencies with remote inspections for simple inspections. This is a very important part of our work. So this will allow our inspectors actually to do these inspections remotely. It keeps them from having to drive to many different locations in the city. So we're hoping to see more efficiencies in that area. We have already begun work around digital inspections form in our development services transformation work. And with this new application, our inspection forms are generated digitally and automatically transferred to our inspectors' tablets. And of course, this saves us time and responding to the COVID-19 crisis has shown our staff what is actually truly possible.
Rosalind, I'm sorry to interrupt, if I could for just a moment. I think there may be some transmission issues just with Wi-Fi, maybe on your end. Is it possible, perhaps maybe by turning off the video, it might enable us to hear you more clearly?
Certainly.
Thank you. Yeah, my
Okay.
apologies. Thank you very much.
Certainly. So just going back to point 3, while we were a little behind the curve on digital submissions, we have found that responding to the COVID-19 crisis has shown us what is really possible. So we are currently working on developing a long-term digital submission platform for our customers to submit and for staff to review. This current experience, while it's not necessarily ideal, it does pave the way for future rollout of our digital inspection and review process coming later this year as part of our ongoing development services transformation work. By having our appointments take place remotely, we can save our customers time and money and obviously provide more efficiency. And then lastly, as we reflect on how difficult this process has been, and knowing that it has been very frustrating for many of our customers, all of us have had to meet unprecedented challenges. I think perhaps the greatest lesson was actually discovering the capacity of our staff to meet these unprecedented challenges. Our different levels of management understood that goal and the vision, and they had the infrastructure in place to deploy change management. And then all of our frontline staff understood their importance and their role in the regional economy and how important development services is to the vitality of the city. So with that, I want to end with the next slide with a few photos of our team members across the development services partners. This shows how we've been adapting to our new way of work. So that first image on the top left is actually a Zoom meeting being conducted. This is a staff meeting among our planning permit center staff. The top right image is actually a screenshot of a remote video inspection being conducted on Zoom. And this is an inspection of the installation of a Tesla power wall unit. The bottom right photo shows one of our building division managers actually getting paper plans distributed to staff. So we had to do this in week 1 of the order so that we could get the paper plans out to staff in a safe manner, and staff were able to pick those up and do the review on those plans. And then the middle bottom photo is a building inspection dispatch that happened on the morning of April 20th. It's 6:30 in the morning, and you can see 2 of our building supervisors, Mary Reed and Patrick Lewis, actually in City Hall. They have other staff on the Zoom getting ready for dispatch of inspection assignments. And then the last photo on the bottom left is one of our planning technicians, Kenneth Chow, who is handling an application intake with a bit of help from his pet at home. So with that, I'm now going to turn over the presentation over to Chris Burton, who will share more about how we are preparing for construction and development to open up.
Thanks, Rosalind. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Chris Burton, Deputy Director with the Office of Economic Development. And during the current deployment, I'm actually acting as the Assistant Director of our liaison branch in the EOC. So I'll be providing this portion of the presentation a little bit with both hats on. We wanted to give you some additional context to the significant amount of work that Development Services has undertaken in response to the current pandemic. And in doing so, we also wanted to look forward with relation to development and construction and be mindful of the impacts and the opportunities that the current situation represents. So I'd like to start off with the context of where we are now, where we're headed next, and what we need to be mindful of later. So for now, really our work in the EOC as it relates to development services has been focusing on maintaining consistency with that county order, providing sort of more information and interpretation for developers and contractors, and then being ready for changes as they've come about. So the county's been using their FAQs to make clarifications around the order, and so we've been helping provide those interpretations with development services in partnership. But as we know, coming next, the county will be updating the order later this week, and we look forward to that transition and understand what those changes will be. In doing so, we'll be looking to ensure that the city is providing clear and consistent information as it's received, so we can provide that to all of the businesses we work with, but in particular the development community. And then we're also developing principles about how we should prioritize work to ensure that we can get construction moving as quickly as possible. And then, of course, we're looking, even further forward to when we're sort of beyond the shelter-in-place situation, and looking at ways that we can target development service activities to really help speed economic stabilization first, and then ultimately recovery. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in planning for the next transition and the future sort of end to the shelter-in-place requirements, we've been looking at trends and challenges that were occurring before the pandemic, as well as drawing from our experience during the last recession. And what we know above all else is that we really need to be prepared for a dynamic and evolving situation with regard to both our customer service and the kind of broader economic picture. We're already hearing a lot of conversations around the real estate market about how companies and developers are thinking about space. But in the near term, private investment in new development in particular is likely to slow significantly. And in some submarkets or product types throughout the city, we'll see it completely stop due to sort of a lot of that ongoing uncertainty around the financial markets, around demand for real estate, and certainly around costs. Another part of that uncertainty will likely come from the changes in which we occupy spaces, both as a result directly of the shelter-in-place order and the physical distancing requirements, but in the longer term also the sort of what are the impacts of this telecommuting project that we've all become a part of overnight, and how much of that resides and continues in the marketplace thereafter. There's also considerable uncertainty regarding the impact of ongoing costs of development. So production slowdowns and supply chain disruption will have significant impacts on material costs, and particularly material availability. It's also unclear as to the impact of the current crisis on labor costs and also labor availability. And then also with regards to the way that the city has recently looked at cost of development through the cost of development studies and financial feasibility, there's considerable uncertainty around whether it will or what will happen to rents in both the commercial and residential markets. If you consider that feasibility was challenging in many parts of the city without rent increases before the current COVID crisis, then it's likely that feasibility will likely remain challenging in the near future as we come out of this situation. This in turn will likely continue to cause a deepening around housing affordability and housing availability as we continue to sort of lag behind current demand with production. And as more families continue to be impacted by this disruption to their income and livelihood, we'll see considerable increased demand around housing affordability. And then lastly, we're thinking about other transitions or influences that could be accelerated or affected by the current situation. If many people will recall that the last recession helped accelerate some of the major transitions around retail. We've already seen some of the larger retail box, the larger box market undergoing significant transitions in the last 6 to 12 months prior to this situation. So we're being really thoughtful about that market and what could come next, as well as how other industries, such as sort of e-commerce and distribution, which have continued, to operate through the current shelter in place. We were seeing increased demand before the crisis, and so as people's online shopping habits, potentially continue past the shelter in place, what will be the impact on that real estate market? And then also, what are those programs out there, particularly the Opportunity Zone program, that could be significant in the near term? So Opportunity Zones in particular, a lot of them had funds in place that were raised prior to the current situation. But as it stands right now, we believe they're still under the same timeline to expend those funds. So there could be an opportunity to capture near-term development opportunity there. Next slide, please, Lee. So in working through these issues, we've been thinking about our principles for reopening construction and development. Rosalind touched on some of the tactical pieces that have already been put in place. But from a slightly higher level, first and foremost, we're focused on maintaining whatever momentum exists through the end of this current development cycle. Our priority, as Rosalind just spoke to, is to ensure that projects that can continue under the order are kept moving. And there are roughly 120 projects that have been allowed to proceed under the provisions in the order. There are different requirements around what projects can continue. We're also focused on ensuring that projects that were underway but that have been placed on hold as a result of the order are ready to move once the order is modified or lifted. And then lastly, that new projects that were poised to start or ready to sort of pull those permits can do so as soon as possible by making sure that we're getting all those available building permits issued. We're looking to understand that there will likely be a lot of requests for service as soon as development starts again. So it'll probably take a week, maybe a little more, for some of the major construction sites to get going, but certainly around some of the smaller projects, there's probably a backlog of demand as people start to get those projects underway, especially around inspection. So we'll want to make sure that we're aware of what the important timelines are and how we can prioritize those projects that are having a significant impact on economic momentum locally, while also ensuring that we're providing good customer service across the board, including those smaller projects and residential remodels. In addition to making sure that we're responding to the immediate development opportunity, we want to focus on priming the pump for the next development cycle. So early work to entitle big catalytic projects was critical during the last recovery after the 2009 recession, and it allowed us to move quickly on opportunities that promoted economic growth. So we also need to focus beyond the individual projects on how we clear our policy backlog to ensure that there are no barriers to that development when it does start to come. So, critical examples would be, residential development in North San Jose, the continuing transition of SECRA from the LOS standards to VMT. It also includes looking at our existing programs to ensure that any timelines or expiration dates that we do have out there don't create challenges for potential near-term development as they're moving through the process. process and ensuring that their financing is in place. One of the other major factors through the last recession and into the recovery was impacts to service delivery as a result of the fiscal situation in the city. This is something that some of us, experienced very closely. For an example, our planning department lost 15 years worth of experience, was largely impacted within sort of 2 years of the last recession, and much of the rebuilding and the optimization in our planning process has been a result of that, even sort of 10 years on. So we need to be mindful of those experience and make sure that as we experience those massive shifts in development, that we minimize that ongoing impact to service delivery. And then lastly, we're focused on understanding and responding to this dynamic situation that I previously mentioned. We want to ensure that both our service delivery and our policy framework keeps pace with the world around us as it changes. Next slide, please. Okay, so lastly, I just want to end on some additional tactics that we're exploring to implement or drive some of these principles. So just to work through this quickly, we're looking at if there's opportunity to reschedule inspections on a kind of floating schedule. So as the order changes, we can ensure that the construction schedule for large projects isn't delayed, and that we can make sure that we're ready to deliver on that service. We're also looking to prioritize those projects that have an outsized impact on development momentum in and around downtown in particular. There's a couple of key projects that are underway, and we want to make sure that we're troubleshooting any issues as they arise, particularly around sort of timeline. As it relates to timeline, I think the other thing we're going to be mindful of is that there will be compressed construction schedules. We anticipate that folks will be looking to catch up on lost time. And so anything we can do to support that will be important. You've already heard about how we're extending some of our development permit or building permit expirations. But we'll also be looking at ways to extend development permits so that those opportunities can be on the shelf ready to go for a longer period. And then again, as those projects look to catch up on lost time, those that are under construction, there may be opportunities to explore temporarily lifting restrictions on construction hours to extend them longer. So those are the types of things that we think could make a near-term difference as we experience this transition through the county order. We'll obviously be keeping you apprised as we go through these various changes and transitions, and look forward to any feedback that you have. And with that, I'll hand the presentation back to Lee.
Thank you, Chris and Rosalind and the team for that excellent presentation. Just as you heard a little bit about economic recovery within the city of San Jose, the rest of this presentation is going to focus on our organizational and fiscal recovery. And the presentation is going to focus on fiscal recovery related to the response, but then also organizationally, how we continue to move forward with the complexity of the recovery process. We will be guiding the COVID finance recovery by 3 principles: do the recovery right, maximize our reimbursement, and minimize any impact to the general fund or city funds for that matter. For doing the recovery right, this includes a continued focus on our most vulnerable and at-risk populations through compassion and action, making tough decisions quickly, and working as a single team so everyone gets through the recovery process and this response together. For maximizing our reimbursement, much of our response and recovery process should be covered by state and federal funds, including FEMA, as well as the Coronavirus Relief Fund. We will maximize our reimbursement potential by strategically matching the highest and best funding sources to the highest and best uses of these funds, and strengthening our funding requests through our clear documentation and our tracking processes that have been in day 1 of this response. And then lastly, minimizing any general fund impact. While the economic crisis will affect all of our funds, the most powerful effect on our community and the most important tool we have in our budget is our general fund. Therefore, we will be working together through the recovery process to use any other funding eligibility through FEMA, whether it be state fundings for those uses before we go to our city funds. And to walk through our initial strategy at a very high level, I'd like to hand it over to our Assistant Director of our Finance Department and our Emergency Operations Finance Section Chief, Luz Cofrese Howe, to walk you through our initial plan.
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. It's a pleasure to present with you. At this point, there are a significant number of funding sources developed to address the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, from the very large, such as the CARES 3.0 Act, which we'll go into a bit more detail later, to the very small, like the $75,000 that's available in the Fair Housing Assistance Program, which will provide technology and administrative support to housing programs. Frankly, to witness this extraordinary amount of money being dedicated for a single cause is remarkable and reflects how unprecedented this COVID event is. We also have an extraordinary amount of need, as you are well aware, not just for our traditionally most at-risk populations, but also for the newly disenfranchised, the unemployed, the troubled businesses. As a city, we are now buying personal protective equipment, also known as PP&E, by the pallet, funding organizations that deliver diapers and baby formulas to parents and children, expanding shelter capacity for the unhoused, and taking the lead on food distribution for the county. So the city needs to make the most of any and all available funds to, as Lee said, to do the recovery right, to maximize reimbursement and minimize the impact on city funding sources. The graphic that you are looking at is a very, very high level view of how our funding sources will waterfall for this event, starting from FEMA, other federal and state funds, to the CARES Act, which includes the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and last to city monies. The graphic represents a couple of themes. One is how hard is money to get and to use? FEMA and federal money are historically the most challenging to access, with the state money maybe being a little bit easier. However, federal CARES Act dollars apparently are fairly flexible as far as the guidance that we've received so far. However, we also have to include, last but not least, city sources. They have the fewest restrictions as those monies are fully under city control. I just felt Jim Shannon blanch, or saw him visually blanch. I'm not saying that we should be using those general funds first. I'm simply making an observation about how easy they are for us to use. What this graphic also represents is how we will fund our needs. There are a number of activities that FEMA is clear about funding, such as Emergency Operations Center expenses or personal protective equipment purchases. For example, FEMA has already funded the state of Iowa $44 million for PP&E on April 4th through its expedited application process. We intend to fund what clearly are FEMA and federally eligible activities that the city has and completes with FEMA and federal monies, then progress through state funding, and then the available CARES Act money, matching sources and uses in the most optimal manner possible. To close out the waterfall analogy, so we'll get to the end of that, the goal is to have the city funding sources provide that last trickle of funding between 6 and 7%. In summary, we are developing a strategic funding plan, a coordinated tool, if you will, to best leverage available monies for the city. Next slide, please. So let's look at the most recent coronavirus relief package in more detail, which is represented by the large bubble. That is a CARES 3.0 Act, which was signed on March 27th, which provided $1.8 trillion in direct aid to individuals and businesses. In the CARES bubble are other smaller bubbles, which represent money the city has either secured already, which is in green, or funding for which the city plans to apply, which is in yellow. A sizable chunk of green is the Coronavirus Relief Fund, of which, and hang on, I need to look at the number, $178,295,248 showed up in the city banking account last Monday morning. Additional monies that have also been secured is $66 million in FAA money for the airport, as well as $8 million from HUD for housing and other necessities. We are planning to apply for public safety money, library money, and firefighter assistance money. The bubble in the upper right-hand corner represents the state money for which the council took action I believe last week on April 20th, 21st perhaps, 17.2 million in homeless housing assistance prevention, HHAP money, and 3.9 million in emergency homeless funding grant money. That's SB 89 money. I also want to point out that this graphic does not represent the entire world of funding that is or will be available to the city. It is simply a snapshot in time. We continue to look for and advocate for more funding to support the needs to address this pandemic. Next slide, please. The Treasury Department released guidance on the coronavirus relief fund, or CRF, money a couple of days after we actually got the 178 million. Although CRF money is fairly flexible, as I noted above, the guidance is also clear that some program categories are simply not eligible. The most important one for us as a local government is that CRF cannot be used to replace lost city revenue. Additionally, CRF cannot pay for expenses included in the city's FY 2019-2020 budget or to provide bonuses for employees. Finally, to be considered as eligible, expenditures must have been incurred between March 1st and December 30th, 2020. Any funds not expended by that time must be returned to the Treasury Department. Next slide, please. On the other hand, there are a broad range of activities, including the ones that are listed on this slide, for which CRF can be used. To be eligible for CRF monies, activities must be in response to COVID-19, either directly either by enforcing the public health order and buying PP&E, or indirectly for secondary effects of the pandemic, including unemployment and business closures. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Bennett Chang, who will provide a federal funding update.
Good afternoon. So last week, we spent a lot of time here at Council talking about the CARES Act 3.0. And a lot of that conversation was around how the city might be receiving funding from the CARES Act. Today, we also wanted to mention and just clarify that the city of San Jose is not the only local government that has received and will receive CARES Act funding. For example, our partners at the county also received a direct allocation through the Coronavirus Relief Fund and from CDBG, and school districts in particular are in line for specific education pots of money through the CARES Act. The federal guidance is very clear that we cannot spend funding from different programs on the same activity. So it's really critical that we continue to coordinate with our partners at these agencies on funding opportunities to make sure we have a strategic and comprehensive funding picture. As most of you have heard, the president also signed an interim package last week, the Paycheck Protection Program and Health Enhancement Act. This was a $484 billion package that mainly went to 3 different places: to the Small Business Administration for additional small business loan programs, to testing, and then to hospitals for some of their needs. Now the focus in Congress is really shifting over to the 4th package. The city has been working very diligently with our delegation and with our different coalition members, including the Big City Mayors Coalition the mayor is heading, to make sure that we have some advocacy around this package. From the city side, we're really focused on a couple of different areas. One is to continue the direct funding to states and local governments for our response, and to make sure that that funding is flexible. As you heard Luz just say, the guidance that came out from the Treasury Department was very clear that the coronavirus relief funds cannot be used for lost city revenue. So that's a key ask that we're making at the federal level. We've also asked for additional small business support, support for our unhoused residents, and then finally support for our undocumented community members as well as part of our federal advocacy. I will say that the outlook for the next package is pretty unclear right now. We expect House Democrats will release another bill at the end of this week as a discussion point. We are expecting that that next bill will probably be a CARES 2.0. So what we're hearing is that there will be the same programs that are funded in CARES, but with additional money. We are not expecting at this point that that next package will include any of the infrastructure or economic stimulus activities that people have been talking about. There's been a lot of rhetoric, I would say, from both sides right now between Republicans and Democrats about what should and should not go into the package, and as well as from the president. So I think it's very clear that House Democrats have been pushing very, very hard, along with Senate Democrats, for that direct funding to local and state governments. So The timing of this is also fairly unclear. I just got a note that the House is delaying their planned return to DC next week. So I think they are in a similar position as our state government, where there's a lot of uncertainty over how they will be conducting their business. We have heard from our federal lobbyists that depending on how quickly the small business loan program funds are spent from this interim package, there might be additional pressure to act sooner rather than later on the fourth package. So with that, I'll pass it back over to Lee.
Thank you, Benna. The mayor and council, that really closes out staff's presentation. I did want to highlight what Luz mentioned earlier, just the amount of funds available for relief and the recovery process is quite large. It's something like we've never seen. And so within the city manager's office and the leadership team, we will have an integrated approach with the emergency operations center and the finance recovery portion, along with our budget office and leadership, to ensure that we have an integrated and enhanced approach to our own organizational and fiscal recovery, so that we can continue to respond and ensure essential services for our residents as we move forward. And we will continue to engage the mayor and council as we learn more from the state, federal government, and as we continue to enhance our own financing and budgetary plans around this response. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dave.
Thank you, Lee, and thanks to the whole team. So, Mayor, that concludes our report on item 3.1.